The next witness is Scott Mayer.
Mr. Mayor, would you be sworn?
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Scott Mayer, is it?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayer, are you appearing here today and testifying under oath voluntarily?
Yes, I am.
Have you been paid by anyone for your testimony other than expenses for coming to Clearwater?
Not at all.
You have a lawsuit against the Church of Scientology.
No.
Does the Church of Scientology have a lawsuit against you?
Yes.
Has anyone suggested to you that you should state anything but the truth, or has anyone suggested that you change your testimony for any reason?
Not at all.
Okay. Would you like to make a statement?
Yes, I would. I find it a little bit difficult to distill 12 years of experience with the church, and I was a senior executive with the church for approximately 7 of those years, so it's to distill all of that information into a small period of time here is kind of difficult. So I've prepared an outline of things that I would like to touch on, and in kind of a rapid sequence, and after that's through, I'm willing to answer questions about any of the areas I touch on, if that's agreeable to you.
Yes, sir. Why don't you just follow your outline, and then we can ask you questions when you've completed your outline.
Oh, okay, fine. I basically just wanted to let you know what I'm doing now. I work on an on-call basis as a legal assistant and administrative assistant for the city of Santa Monica in the city attorney's office and the environmental services area. And I work for also as a consultant to the Internal Revenue Service with the current U.S. tax case that's been going on for some time, and worked with the senior counselor for the IRS during that tax case as a consultant. The tax case I'm referring to is the time period of I believe it's 68 through 71 in the U.S. tax court. Judge Sterrett was the Internal Revenue Service. In terms of the organization, I entered the administration as a result of having a ship's master training program being offered to me. At one time during the Vietnam War, I was on a navigation team for the flagship of the 7th Fleet, and used to run aircraft carriers in and out of various harbors around the world, so I had quite a bit of ship experience when I was first exposed to Scientology, and I was offered a training program that would get me a full master's certificate, and I went in on that basis, that and an educational program. What I want to do real quickly here is just give you some sort of a background of what I did, because I went all over the world for the church for a long time, and on basically a troubleshooting basis. And the main point that I think I really want to stress here and bring out from an insider's point of view is the overall administrative structure of the church, because a great deal of publicity has been put out that your individual churches are corporate bodies unto themselves with their own board of directors, and many of the boards of directors around the planet that they publicize, I worked with those directors, and they were just common everyday staff members who signed papers when it was necessary. So I want to kind of go over the post areas that I held my jobs so that you can see what kind of a background I had, and it'll probably make it a little easier for you to ask direct questions later. I have been at one time or another everything from a bodyguard to the now deceased Quentin Hubbard to the fleet captain for the Hubbard's fleet of ships on the West Coast. I was an executive troubleshooter for top management of the church. I went on a few missions out of Clearwater under the control of the Church of Scientology as an administrative director. in other words, as a command team. They're the basic command organization for the entire Church of Scientology. When I left in 1966, was situated right here, and 76, excuse me, was situated here in Clearwater, and had been on the flagship Apollo. I was the ship's manager just prior to the move here, and part of my job was getting the ship ready to come in here. I did approximately 18 successful missions for the senior top management of the church all over the world, including South Africa, Scotland, Manchester, St. Hill in England. I've worked with Guardian's Office staff members. I worked with Jane Kember, and I worked with Mo Budlong. Did an intelligence mission in Scotland for the church while I was there in... well, Jane Kember was the Guardian for the Church of Scientology, the head of the Guardian's Office below Mary Sue Hubbard. Mary Sue Hubbard was Commodore's staff guardian, which Commodore's staff were the assistants to the Commodore, to Ron, in each of the divisional areas of the church: finance, dissemination, public relations. Ron had a staff member, a Commodore staff for each one of those areas. Here in Clearwater, they did evaluations on a weekly basis for the entire worldwide network of the church. And on the basis of the financial well-being of various organizations around the world, missions, people who were top management trained would go out to various organizations to jack the income back up because it was down. And your whole control or command information center for those evaluations sat here in Tampa after the ship came in here, and flag was moved into the Fort Harrison Hotel. So that's just a little kind of a background of the type of thing I did. I acted primarily as a troubleshooter. When things would go wrong, I'd be sent out to make them to go right. The reason I left Scientology, by the way, was because of the things that I saw and participated in through my tenure with the church. It got to the point where I could no longer, in my own mind, justify what the church's policy for handling government agencies and the society it was allegedly there to save. I could no longer reconcile that with the stated aims of the church. To jive. So I resigned from the Sea organization while on a leave of absence in 1976 and was subsequently expelled by the church. Part of the reason I wanted to come down here was that I had talked to Martin Cohn, who was the senior counselor for the IRS in the tax case about a week or so ago, and I asked him if there was anything that I could do for them while I was down here in terms of bringing back information. And one of the things that he said to me is, he said, Scott, we've been a year at this now, and I'm still on an on-call basis with them as consultant. He said, if I had realized what you were trying to tell me a year ago, we could have taken a whole different tack with this case. And what I have observed, and I have to admit to you that I've stayed pretty well in hiding for the last 3 years. After I had an experience where my car was blown up on Christmas Eve in 1978 in front of a place where the church thought I was staying, but I was living elsewhere. I had planted that information in the church so that I'd know if they were ever trying to contact me. So I've stayed pretty much in hiding, and I feel that these hearings are a chance for a little bit of light to come out on this, so that people who are out in the field now, and I know a lot of them, I'm small potatoes compared to what some of the people out in the field have, the things that they've done and experienced, and I would like very much for them to feel free to be able to rejoin society and contribute to it, because that, in essence, was their main concern and reason for going into church in the first place, was to help evolve the planet. There's a tendency to kind of group Scientologists together in terms of the reflection that top management is presented. But the average staff member is nothing more, as far as I'm concerned, than a psychological, psychopolitical dupe. The organization is structured in such a manner that everything is done on a need-to-know basis, much like security in the military. And evaluations are done to keep various areas of the church operating on their own goals and purposes without really knowing what's going on in another area. Although there is an incredible grapevine that goes through the Church of Scientology. I had an amusing incident about a week ago where I told a story to someone who was no longer in Scientology at a place in Los Angeles, California, and within a week the story had gone across country through some Scientologists and back through a friend of my wife's, and back to me, and the person that I talked to could no longer get any information about the church. But it took a week, just person to person, to get the story. And I won't bother with the story. It's just a funny anecdote. That's all. Getting back to my original point, I'm basically here today to try to impress you with the magnitude of the operation that you are facing, and I want you to know in certain terms that there is constant evaluation of this hearing going on and all of the things that have happened up to now. And right over here in their Combat Information Center, if that's where they still got it, evaluations are being done on how to handle you. And I would like to see the tables turned for a change, because I don't believe what they're doing is ethical. The points that I would like to cover today are basically violations of clear-cut public policy, such as the registration and operation of maritime vessels, violations of those rules, transportation of funds in and out of the United States illegally, the violation of federal communications regulations on the use of telex and radio communication equipment, transportation of personnel into and out of the country in violation of immigration laws, conspiracy to impede the IRS, the use of cruel and unusual punishment, and in to defraud the United States Postal Service, and I have personal experience with the church in all of those areas. Also, the ill treatment of children and parishioners, living conditions. I've traveled to almost all of the organizations around the world, and Clearwater is just another step in the whole game. In accounting, we talk about the normal course of business and business papers, things that are written out and done standardly pretty much on a day-to-day basis, notes, CPA's notes. Well, the church has a standard operating basis. It has an incredible amount of policy that it can show you to tell you that it's not doing anything, but to someone who's really well trained in their policy, they can show you a policy that makes it be all right. So what you continuously have a facade being put forth to the public about what's church policy, but there is a corollary, a corresponding policy that would make it all right to violate that policy.
Superseding policy?
Yes, well, it happens to be a crime in the church to impede Scientology. And any staff member would be, severely punished in terms of the organization for impeding the progress, the expansion of Scientology. That they're called high crime policies. Fair game policy is part of that, which is allegedly canceled, but I have never found a church official that could show me the policy that canceled it, because it would have to be written by Ron Hubbard and specifically deny that policy, not the little caption that's printed down at the bottom. I printed those captions. I used to be Deputy Pub Chief U.S. in the early 70s. We put them on all the policy letters, but it didn't cancel anything, and certainly not the way an ethics officer would handle a person who was trying to impede the progress of the church. In terms of the fair game policy itself, of course, I have no way of proving that the Church of Scientology blew up my car. I just have the knowledge within myself that that's where I told them I was, and that's where it got blown up. The fact that I didn't live there was to my credit, not theirs. So, in testifying before the U.S. tax court, the day after my address went on the record, I was sued by the church by my ex-wife, who's, I presume, still in Scientology. The transcript hadn't even been published yet, and they had my name and address and had a little kid come out and serve me the papers. So I was being sued, and I subsequently moved, and I was under IRS protection at the time anyway. I was in a safe house, so I moved, and I've been moving ever since. They also pulled out my what's called a B1 file during the Scientology hearings, and what it basically is a list of the things that I have done wrong in the past that came out of my confessional folders. I'm kind of getting a little out of sequence here in terms of what I wanted to talk to you about, but since the point has been brought up, there is a statement by the church that confessional folders are not available to anybody but the auditor or the minister. And I can't tell you the number of folders that I looked at when I was going around various organizations trying to get the income up, because I had to know what was going on with the people in order to get them back in line and get them doing their job. They brought out my B1 file. I didn't even know it was that thick. I was rather flattered. I didn't know that they could get that much stuff out of it. But there were a couple of files sitting right next to me at in the courtroom that had my name on it, and they didn't have anything else but my confessional folders and my B1 file. The B1 file comes out of the confessional folders. It's a timed sequence, a date-time sequence list of all of the things that they feel they can use with it. Yeah, that's a very good point. This was during the second day of the trial in Los Angeles, California, that the file appeared.
Which trial is that you're talking about?
This was the U.S. tax court trial. The approximate time would have been around February of last year. In about February of last year. I was about 2 days into it. You have to realize my function during the trial was when the Scientologists would get up on the stand and tell their version of what was going on with the church, whenever they would either directly lie or when they would present a policy letter that was supposed to tell what kind of what their policy was on the subject that was being discussed, I would reach over to Mr. Cohen and I would direct him to the policy letter, the definition that opposed that. So I was not very popular with the church's attorney, because we started shooting holes in their story. So the next couple of days after that, my folders arrived, and it was just nothing more than a standard attempt to intimidate me and let me know that they were going to try to make public what was in my confessional folders. Well, I would willingly let any one of you read them now, because there isn't anything that anybody's going to do to me anyway. I did what I did. I've been what I've been, and I've either learned from it or I haven't. So I don't have any secrets that way. But it was an attempt to intimidate.
Is that about when your car was blown up?
No, that was in 1978, and I had been moving around. In addition, several Guardian's Office members appeared at friends of mine's houses looking for me during the trial. In fact, the day before I was supposed to appear, I got a telephone call from a Karen Kuiper who was originally out of the Minneapolis organization and married to Bob Kuiper, also a Guardian's Office staff member. She and another girl harassed a friend of mine down in Laguna Beach while they were trying to get in touch with me before I went ahead and testified. The other areas that I would like to cover with you is how Scientology actually operates against the best interest of the community, and possibly touch on some things that I believe would help you in the incredible job that you've got of making ordinances out of all of this when it's done. So I'd like to get back to the use of various telex equipment, so on and so forth. During the course of my time in Scientology, as a senior executive, I was on call 24 hours a day. I could be on course in Los Angeles and be ordered into briefing because a set of flag mission orders had come in ordering me to Austin, Texas, or Boston, or Florida, or South Africa, and I'd have about 15 or 20 minutes to get my stuff together and get in a briefing. And incidentally, one of my jobs when I first got into the upper level executive structure was briefing couriers on how to get things in and out of the country. I probably have 100 briefing tapes of people, couriers, that I briefed on how to get through the various immigration, customs officials, postal officials, attempts, to get things out of the country. I have been personally involved with people who have brought money in and out of the United States. My ex-wife and I smuggled $2,000 worth of rand apiece into Clearwater on our last mission from South Africa in 1976.
$2,000 worth of what?
Rand, Kruger rand. Oh. That's the form of currency there. So I'm familiar with the fact that it isn't just an accident if some money gets out of the country. It's a regular established procedure. There's an interesting thing about the procedure too, because on the face of it, it looks like everyday business activities and students coming in and out and so on and so forth, which is of course exactly what it's supposed to look like. A Scientologist, for instance, in Los Angeles that was going to come to Clearwater to get some training would be taken into the briefing room in Los Angeles and briefed on techniques of getting through various governmental agencies. They would even go so far as to be play demo. They would do play demonstrations of the ways that they were going to do it. What if this happened? And I would grill them on all of the possibility, all of the things that I thought that they could run into, until I was certain that they could pass a security check, which is nothing more than a lie detector test. And they could go down and they could say that they understood their mission and they knew how to carry it out, and they had no other reason for going but to carry their mission out. And this was routine. They were routinely checked on a lie detector to make sure that they'd actually got what I was trying to tell them, and didn't have any other reasons for doing it. But we might send out 12 or 15 people in a week to Clearwater, to other places earlier where Flag was. I was also, at the time, I covered what was called operations in the United States. I was directly under what was then the Continental Commander for the United States area. I handled external communications, telex transmissions, church management across the United States on a supervisory level, and data evaluations, organization analysis. I would analyze things that were going on in various churches around the country and devise programs or plans that people could be sent out on to raise the income level in the organization. So I might brief 10 or 12 people a week to go out to Flag, and my external communications chief would have pre-wrapped, using two sets of wrappers, the first wrapper for whatever was going out would have the liaison office address on it for wherever the package was going to go through before it was mailed, before it got to flag. And the second one would be a phony address and a phony corporate name on it. And at one time, when I first inherited the job, we maintained 5 different phony companies that things were shipped out of Los Angeles to various parts of the world. And all of the packages, as I said, had an outer wrapping and then an inner wrapping, so that when the couriers successfully got out of the country, the wrapping could be taken off at the liaison office and then forwarded to the next checkpoint. After the couriers were briefed by me, they were sent down to finance, where they would be given packages to courier to flag. None of the couriers, because of the fact that the packages were pre-wrapped, knew who had the loot or who had what. They were all instructed to act as though they were just corporate papers. And that was part of the standard everyday briefing. And people, well, I was briefed on 3 missions here in Clearwater, and I took documents out of the country. I was sent out as a tourist to South Africa and England and Scotland from Clearwater, and came back here and debriefed, and then went out again. I have to say to you in all frankness that when I stumbled across the little invoice fixing project on flags. I was the ship's manager of the Apollo just before it came in here to Florida. The church was doing a little invoice changing project directly underneath our office on the ship, and I got my wife and I sent out on missions because I didn't want to be here when the IRS hit them when they got into Clearwater. So I was probably not quite the perfect Scientologist in that respect, but I just couldn't see how they could get away with it. And as it turns out, they're not, which is great.
I'd just like to make a legal point for the Commission here. This background and the relevance and importance of all this testimony is that the allegation in the report and the considerations for the Commission are that the goals, purposes, representations, policies of the church are misrepresented to people here in Clearwater as what they're paying for, what the nature of the organization is, and that these policies with regard to what the nature of the organization is are uniform, and therefore important to your consideration is whether there are uniform policies that have been in practice for many years right up to the present time here in Clearwater, which are in direct contradiction to those represented policies as to the nature of the organization for which people are paying millions of dollars for here in Clearwater. So from a legal point of view, all of this testimony is extremely important.
Mr. Colibank has a quick question.
Yeah, I've got a legal point, Mr. Flynn. One of the newspaper reporters that's reporting on this legislative hearing continually refers to allegations. In fact, your allegations as these witnesses come up, and for the benefit of the public and the viewing public, especially at home, I'd like to have that, if it need be, corrected. Is this testimony and are these documents coming in before the City Commission? Are they as the paper says, and are they your allegations, or what are they? What do we consider them?
Well, first of all, I haven't been sworn under oath yet. I'm not the one testifying, so obviously they're not mine. Right. Secondly, perhaps whoever you're quoting should go to law school to realize the significance of what's being done.
So it is evidence.
When the final report is prepared and the items of evidence that have been introduced so far and will be introduced the rest of the afternoon are presented to the Commission together with the proposals for the ordinances, the significance of them will become quite plain.
So they're not allegations, they're evidence.
That's correct.
It's a good point, Mr. Colibank. Many people have read those allegations, and I'm glad it was cleared up, at least now understood.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to just say something about what just transpired here. I have not heard any of the testimony that's gone on before me, except a couple of minutes of the last person as you were closing. I'm not here to make any legal allegations in terms of a trial or anything like that. I'm here to state to you in no uncertain terms that there is only one Church of Scientology. There's only ever been one Church of Scientology. Its entire management operation has been run from Ron Hubbard through Mary Sue Hubbard through the Guardian's office. The Sea Organization, which is the arm of the church that carries out Ron's administrative policy demands, it has always been that way. There has never been a board of directors that has ever operated autonomously within the church in any organization that I have ever been in, and I've been in almost all of them. One of the persons that I did a mission, for instance, Denny Goggly in St. Hill, England, is allegedly one of the officers of the Church of Scientology. I did a mission with him. He was nothing but a clerk. We did a mission to Scotland to handle a guy that was messing up an organization there, and we used his confessional file and his B1 file and knowledge of communist activities on his part and involvement that he had had with a stolen goods ring to run him out of the area and stop interfering with the church operations. Mr. Goggly had never, ever been in a position. He was kind of a laughable kind of guy, as a matter of fact. There was no way that he was intellectually capable of being an officer of a worldwide organization, let alone the mother church in England.
Could you have him define mission, what he is talking about?
A mission is a specific set of objectives. If I say I went on a mission, that means that there was a specific area that needed to be handled within one of the churches, and a step-by-step sequence of action for rectifying that situation was laid out, and I was very thoroughly briefed on what to do and how to do it. I could walk into the organization and remove the executive director, whether he was the president of the church in that state or not. I could walk in and show him my missions orders and say, "You're on your way to Flag. Be ready in a half hour." And there wasn't going to be anybody that would give me any crap about it. Maybe I'm being a little strong in my language about it, but I'm trying to get across to you that a Sea Org member on a Flag mission order or an L. Ron Hubbard personal mission, which I have been on, had unlimited ethics power in the organization, unlimited ability to walk in and remove the directors and send them packing, have them before what the church calls a committee of evidence, and have their confessional folders brought out, gone through, and charges made, and have them brought up before the committee on it. Nothing to it. That was just standard everyday stuff. The church is very fond of telling you that nobody has access to those confessional folders. It's just not true. Any missionary can order them. I used to order them brought into me so that I could see which people I wanted to take the time, because it's a very lengthy process to do a lie detector test on somebody, especially to the degree that the church does, to get into their personal history, their personal. It's looking for crimes against the church is what it's looking for. You see, it's against policy to impede the progress of the church. In fact, it's a crime not to practice Scientology. You can impede the church by not practicing. So it's very standard procedure to find out who's been doing what, bring them into the office and let them know that you know what they've been doing, what's been going on. One of the techniques that's also used is to go, well, listen, we know where there were some errors in your auditing. We know where there were some case problems here. Don't worry about it. As long as you produce, as long as your production is up, if the person was a registrar, their sales were up for the week, as long as you're doing that, don't worry, you'll get your auditing and we'll make everything all right for you. So I just want to really get that point across to you, that there is no separation of the various churches. In fact, before I left, I used to go into the data files while being briefed for a mission, and I could pull out. The church is very fond of saying there's no connecting financial reports, yet I could walk into the files and get a complete financial report on any organization around the world. Of course, we stuck pretty much to what we were doing for that particular mission, or what we were supposed to do there, but it's just simply not true that there aren't AC2 forms, which are the church's a breakdown of the gross income that comes into the church are standardly sent every Thursday night to what's called data files, so that over that weekend evaluations can be done by the Commodore staff, and if the income had dropped sufficiently in an area, a couple of people like myself could be gotten together and sent out as a team to straighten the area out and get the income going again.
One more legal point. The significance of the record-keeping process of the Church of Scientology, of which the witness has just testified about one little part of, is extremely significant, and we could testify for weeks on that subject alone. It's very significant to this commission because if the Church of Scientology does produce any witnesses, you may rest assured that any subject matters that the commission wishes to question them on, there have been extensive records kept on any of those subjects, as this witness is testifying now pursuant to corporate policy for many years. So if there were records pertaining to any educational processing that's been going on at Fort Harrison, clinics, patients being taken care of, people being taken care of and what they were treated for, children that were in the nursery, what type of education they received, what type of grades they received, guardian's office operations, any of hundreds of varieties of issues, you can rest assured, as the witness will testify, that there has been extensive record keeping about that issue. And so if a witness was brought onto the witness stand, he could be questioned in detail as to, for instance, if there was a school at Fort Harrison, where the school was, what dates the school was run, who attended the school, and what records there are pertaining to all of those items.
I think I can give you a real good example of how confessional folders are routinely used. I was fired on a mission from Clearwater into St. Hill, England. Flag had arrived at that point in time. This ties into the misuse of telex to mislead government officials too, because all of our missions were operated by Mr. Hubbard's son-in-law, who was sitting over here, or was sitting over here at the Fort Harrison, by telex. There was daily telex transmission from wherever we were in the world into Clearwater, into what was called the Action Bureau, where missions would be evaluated on a daily basis. As I said earlier, there were some problems in an organization in Scotland and in Manchester. I was for a short time alone to the Guardian's Office Intelligence Bureau in St. Hill, England. I was shown a B1 file, an intelligence file that came from the pre-clear folders, or the confessional folders of the person we were going up to deal with, which dealt with sexual misconduct, orgies, and so on and so forth of an executive director of the Manchester organization in St. Hill. His wife had already had split from him and had come down to St. Hill, more or less turn herself in and get back in the good graces, and she had supplied a lot of information. We walked into the organization, and I just sat the man down and told him what we knew, and told him he was on his way to St. Hill, and that if he got back in the good graces of the church, he could probably have his organization back. The man was a medical doctor who was also the executive director of one of the organizations. But I know of at least a half a dozen people who knew about the information that was in his confessional folder, and it was used to remove him as the executive director and get him back down to St. Hill for quote-unquote handling. Those operations were monitored via telex from the United States, from your city. Right here. There has never been a command line anywhere in Scientology that did not go through either the Guardian's office or the Commodore's staff to Ron and to Mary Sue. Wherever they have been, their aides have passed down their orders through the rest of the organization. When it moved here, Clearwater was no exception. The whole operation was here. There were just literally thousands and thousands of files. There was a room bigger than this one filled with file cabinets where they pulled off of the ship that contained the data of all the missions that had been sent out from Flag. All that information was available right here in your city. I read it, I used it, and did my job. I couldn't have done my job without it. I had to know what was going on in the organizations in order to be able to handle the people we were having trouble with.
Those files were here in Clearwater?
In the bank building, right over here. That's where I was briefed.
That's why they need a big vault.
Yeah, Mr. Hatch raised a point. That's why they need a vault.
That's why they needed a big vault.
I would like to read
The potential legal ramifications of much of this witness testimony, as was Mr. Walter's testimony, although not known at the time, are broad-ranging, and at a later point in time they'll be made plain. But virtually all of this testimony is extremely important with regard to the proposed ordinance.
I have a photostatic copy of the original, and by the way, the data that I'm going to talk to you about from this is available to the counselor. So if you need copies of it, you're more than welcome to it. I'm going to have to translate this somewhat to you, but because of the terminology, however, the terminology, you can look it up in your own version of the Scientology dictionary when you get the telex later on. But this telex was sent to the LRH's, L. Ron Hubbard's, personal secretary in the United States by L. Ron Hubbard's personal secretary on Flag, which was then located in the Netherlands Antilles. This was in, I believe, 1974 or 75. The name of the person was Ken Urquhart. He's well known as the LRH personal secretary. With translations, it reads to the LRH personal secretary, Toby, regarding the ship. At this time, I had just inherited the flotilla of ships in the on the West Coast, and I became the fleet captain. I'm qualified to run any tonnage, any ocean, any weather. So I was qualified as the skipper, and I had just taken it over. But the ships were in very poor shape. They had been run by unqualified personnel who didn't know what they were doing, didn't know how to maintain them, and they were placing the church at risk, basically. I had taken in aircraft carriers through renovations while in the service. I took the Apollo through one, so I knew what I was doing, and I was appointed as the captain. However, the ship was sitting alongside the dock. You have to realize this ship it was 185 feet long, and it had a couple of hundred crew members on it. And it was costing the church $5,000 a week to sit there. That was our budget per week, $5,000. The church wanted it out, cruising up and down the coast, doing recruiting, doing events, public events where we could introduce people to Scientology and then usher them into the local organization, to the registrar, to be signed up for courses. The telex reads, leave the threat of the rehabilitation project forces hanging over them for now. And this was regards to the staff, the ship's officers that I inherited when I took on the post. Public officer, the ship's finance officer, the chief officer. These are people who had not, quote unquote, made it so far. It was costing a lot of money. It says, leave the threat of the rehabilitation force hanging over them for now. Have their confessional folders gone through listing all crimes found. Crimes must be verified as not auditor errors, and the criminals with the greatest treasonous action put on the rehabilitation project forces. The remainder are told that they have one more chance to come clean and go straight. Have their folders summarized and programmed for vital corrections, and then security checking, lie detector test. If then no mark changes, they go to the rehabilitation project forces. Regardless of any auditing or security checking, those not going to the RPF are to get on the ball and pull their weight to complete the ship's programs by the deadline already given. There's going to be no captain bill to reward you. They make it or they don't, and if they haven't woken up to that, wake them up. Love Earth, Ken Urquhart. Black and white on their own telex form that they order people to go into confessional folders. You may have a copy of it.
For the record, we will be presenting numerous actual telex operations and operations with confessional folders on the overhead projector at the appropriate time. And the significance of that issue, where probably per year thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, numbers unknown by this commission at this point, are coming to your city and paying millions of dollars, believing that all of that information that is being given to this organization is highly confidential, is of obvious legal significance.
The next point that I'd like to talk about in relation to what we've just gone over, the church's free use of telex lines of confessional folders and breaking an entry in order to gain an advantage of the community. In 1971, when I was running operations for the church, I was involved with a man whose name I don't care to give now, unless it's all right with me. Okay. His name was Bill Foster. One of the people that he worked with on the operation is here today, so he could be called up to corroborate what I'm going to say to you. But I received a call from Mr. Bill Foster while in New York. I had been sent from the Apollo, which was operating in the Antilles at the time, to New York with my wife to operate the eastern seaboard for the church on a management mission. Mr. Foster had allegedly been expelled a couple of years earlier for misconduct or something in Boston. I received a call from Bill Foster, and he came into New York. We had been very close friends. He came in with an incredible story. He said that he had in actual fact been operating with the Guardian's office out of Boston and Washington, and involved in a breaking and entering team. His cover had been blown because one of the operatives had been compromised. At the time, I didn't know who that was. And the church was going to leave him high and dry. In other words, they were not going to acknowledge the fact that he had been working for them. They were holding the story that he had been expelled and was doing everything on his own. He came to me because at that time I was the senior executive authority on the Eastern Seaboard for the church and in direct contact with flag management. My mission was being run by telex on a daily basis. He asked me if I could assist him. I called the person who was then in charge of the Guardian's office in Boston, Mr. Bob Raymer, who had also been a friend of mine. I had worked with him on a mission some years earlier in Boston, and I said, I said, look, at Foster's here, this is what he told me. Is it true? Has he been working for you in the field? And he said, yeah, he has. And I said, well, just on the basis of the misuse of policy and handling the man, I thought that I could help him out with flag management. I started to get a lot of heat down the telex lines about him and what he had done and so on and so forth. So I got him out of the country. I sent him to a mission in Canada, where up to a few months ago he was still residing, not being willing to come back to the United States, I suppose until the statute of limitations run out on his activities.
Some more detailed evidence pertaining to that particular subject will also be introduced at a later time. The legal significance of that testimony may relate to the disowning of the policies of the corporation to disown information or responsibility for the actions of its operatives, such as Mary Sue Hubbard and the other top 10 people who have just been convicted. And the significance to this city is the fact that the corporation is now disowning responsibility of those people for any of the things that took place here in Clearwater and around the world. And that disowning of responsibility process began last summer and is taking place right up to the present time. The inferences that could be drawn from the testimony of this witness regarding that policy to disown are becoming apparent on their face.
To elaborate on that even further, I'm not here to complain about what the church has done to me. Understand that. I'm here to really impress upon you what you're actually dealing with, the magnitude of what you're dealing with. In 1971, we had, and of course this ties into the treatment of children too, actually, because in 1971 we had a base in Mexico outside of Rosarito Beach. It was a 1,200-hectare base, and it had been put there as a training camp for Sea Org members, missionaries, and a place to put what was called the Cadet Org, the children's school. Children were routinely transported from Los Angeles to the Mexican base and birthed and housed there under the care of various base personnel so that their mothers and fathers could get on with their business within the church. A lot of them had staff positions, senior executive positions in the church in Los Angeles. We were having a great deal of problems at that time with the city officials. I don't know what the laws are here in Florida, but in Los Angeles, 1.1 person in a one-bedroom apartment, excluding kitchens and bathrooms, is considered overcrowded. Anything over than that. Of course, the church doesn't normally have bathrooms and kitchens in its little rooms, so quite frequently, in fact almost all of the time, rooms are incredibly overcrowded. So there was a place to get the kids out of the country and out of the way of production. Mexico, of course, at that time, and 10 years ago, was still pretty wild. In fact, there were bandit groups roaming the hills, and they used to come down to the base. The base fell under my sphere of responsibility as an operating project. I was in charge of operations. The bandits were coming in at night, and they were stealing grain, and they were stealing saddles, and whatever wasn't tied down, and whatever they could get away with, and causing a lot of commotion. And I was asked to go down with another ex-member of the church whose name I don't care to give you because he's still around. We were asked to go down there and eliminate the bandits. Both that person and myself have had extensive intelligence and counterintelligence activities in the armed forces. The person at that time had free access, in fact was dealing in arms at the time, and was routinely used by the church on various guardian operations. We were asked to go down and actually went into briefing to go down and set up a little infrared sniper scope in the middle of the night and make sure the bandits didn't bother us anymore. Fortunately for me, one of the ladies who was managing the children's org at the time shot one of the bandits, I believe it was the leader, through the front door when they were trying to break in, and they dispersed, and the mission was subsequently called off. I just want to get across to you that at that point in time with the church, that sort of thing, they were impeding Scientology. They were nothing but bandits, and they had to be gotten out of the way. And that was the way. I don't know what else to tell you about it. You can ask me questions about it if you like. All I can say was at the time I was willing to go. I don't necessarily feel good about that now, but at the time I didn't make any protest. I think since I've already mentioned children, I have in conditions in an area, I think I can say without any reservations that the food, the supervision of children, the education of children in every organization that I have ever been in the church has been terrible. I got into an incredible firefight with a person named Fran Broker, who was in charge at that time of financing the various operations in Los Angeles.
What do you mean by firefight?
Well, I was trying to get money for the base, and she had the power of pen. All right, and I had to make a plea for monies to adequately feed and house the children. And the problem that I had, and this is kind of a funny story in a way, but at the time for me it was really serious. The caretaker used to come up from Mexico on a weekly basis to get money to bring back down because they did their purchasing in Mexico because of the price difference. the area was incredibly infested with scorpions, snakes, tarantulas, spiders. The area around the base house had a lot of shrubbery up against the house, and the place had never really been made habitable. The man brought me up a jar full of scorpions, tarantulas, and laid at me. He says, "Look at it. We've got to have money to clear this brush out. So one of these kids gets it. You and I are the ones that are going to be in trouble because we're responsible for the area. The rest of the church is going to take the rap if a kid gets killed down there." So I took the jar and I brought it into the woman, and I plopped it down on her desk, and I said, "Here they are. What I've told you is true, and I'm laying it on you. I'm not going to be responsible anymore for the care of those children if you are going to deny me the funds to get the tools necessary to clean around the house and take all of the brush and stuff away and make it safe for them." And I eventually got the money, by the way, but I was no longer in financial favor in the church. It was a little hard to get money out of. That persisted wherever I went. Staff members were always ill-fed, ill-clothed. I had a personal situation where I had an abscess in my tooth, and I was being audited for it. I wanted to go to the dentist, and I was being audited for it. And they spent about a week and a half giving me various auditing assists, what are called touch assists, to get rid of the pain and get me out of it. And finally, it was just I was just delirious, and there wasn't any money for the medical float, was what it boiled down to. They didn't have the money to take me to the dentist, so they were trying to handle it with Scientology. I went to the dentist, and this was in San Pedro. Although I don't recall the name of the dentist, the records are certainly still available if it ever came to that. He told me I just made it. It was abscessing, and it was up into my gums and stuff, and if it had been another day or so, I wouldn't be here to talk to you today. You want to know about conditions here in Florida, in your own city? When I first came back from, my last mission to South Africa, when I came back, I was very, very disgruntled with the church's operations. I refused to take a posting because it just was not within my sense of ethics. So I went back to what was my original job, which was manager, and the person that I had trained to replace me when I went off with mission was now the manager for the Fort Harrison. His name will probably come back to Mick something. Anyway, I had been his senior, and I came back and I said, "Look, I'm fighting this posting until it's handled. I don't want to do anything except do what the policy says, which is I have a right to my old job back when I come off of a mission. But I don't want to take your job, so just put me to work, and if you're willing to fight for me as a staff member, well, I'm not going anywhere." So for several weeks before I managed to get out of Clearwater and go back to Los Angeles on a leave of absence, I set up bunk beds in the Fort Harrison Hotel up to the ceiling and just packed them in like rats.
You mean people?
People. There were rooms that were smaller than the division in this area here that had bunks in them 5 high, and clothes strewn all over, sea bags full of clothes just hammered there. In fact, my wife and I were stuck in a room that was already occupied by somebody because they were out on another assignment for a couple of days, and we had to coexist with all of their things in the room, and crowded conditions. We didn't even have a place to hang our clothes. And this is routine. I'm not talking about something that happens once in a while. When I was in charge of operations in Los Angeles, I used to drill the staff members. We very often had people that were sympathetic to the church that would apprise us of inspections that were going to take place. And if that would happen, if we would get a forewarning of it, we had drills set up to pull the bunk beds out, move the dressers out, ship them over to one of the other houses until the inspection was over, and then bring it back and pack them back in again.
That was here in Clearwater?
No.
I didn't do the drilling here in Clearwater. But that's part of one of the regular drills that the Sea Organization has on what is called its watch quarter and station bill, which is a list of jobs. It's naval terminology. They have drills on repelling enemy boarders. And Sea Org members are routinely trained on how to do this. So if for instance, security here in Fort Harrison was apprised that there was going to be an inspection, there'd be more Guardian's office personnel running around than you could think of, making sure that everybody got all the evidence out of sight. It would be swept clean before anybody got there. And then a couple of Guardian's office staff member would be put on the inspector to feed them false data, maybe give them reports of their own about conditions, and just generally distract them from carrying out their duties. And this is not something that is just once in a while. It's a drilled thing. It's a training process that Sea Org members went through. Common everyday garden variety training. I think, maybe I'm open right now for anything you want to ask me about. I do have some other things, but I think it'd probably be...
All right, I'll start with a few questions and turn it out to my colleagues. I think you're probably the best one to answer this question that I've asked two others. Why Clearwater? And why the United Churches of Florida? And not Tampa, Brooksville, or Miami? And why not we're the Scientologists?
Well,
is the climate that right?
Yes, in more than one sense of the word. You're talking, when you're talking about setting up a base where L. Ron Hubbard might actually come and exist, you're talking about an area that is very, very heavily evaluated in every sense of the word. Who's in local offices? What have they done? I want you to know that every single person on the city council was very, very thoroughly, their background was very, very thoroughly checked to see if there was any stuff in the woodwork that could be used against you. I happen to know the man that purchased the church grounds here in Clearwater at the time. His name was Ron Strauss. He was a musician on flag in the band when he was selected for the mission to come in and do it.
That's something.
Yeah, these evaluations, of course, were done. They're all done in advance. All of this stuff was done in advance. I was personally sent out on a mission with a man by the name of Commander Bob Young by Ron Hubbard to find a base for the Apollo. It was only a rumor, but it was pretty solid to everybody that was on the ship at the time. The Mary Sue had enough of running around in Ron's rusty old yachts and wanted a nice place where she could, have herself a little chicken farm or something. Didn't, of course, work out that way, but I ran all over the Caribbean with another man looking for locations. We went into the places on a cover story. The cover story was basically that Operation Transport Corporation, which is now and never has been anything else but the Church of Scientology, was going to set up a training center where they could do their business management consulting out of. There was another operation going on at the time called the Universal Media Organization, which was a promotional organization. Television shows, slide shows. We did some work for one of the government officials on Aruba, I believe it was. We did a project for them. This is all to lay in a cover so that when the church came in, all of the questions that could be asked and all the investigations that could be done to discourage them from coming in had been done on an organization that really didn't exist anyway except as a facade to waste your time on. By the time you finished running around trying to sort all that stuff in, we were already here, if I remember correctly.
Well, I remember the story in 1975 when you arrived, and I, of course, wasn't in office then, but the story I had that it was you bought the Fort Harrison for a religious retreat for retired ministers.
Yes, well, the actual fact of the matter is what we were trying to do at that time, and Bob Young, myself, Bill Lazzaroni, I don't know where he is now. We were the ones that, and Ron's personal secretary or assistant at the time, her name is Liz Osley, we conceived the idea of the media organization in order to get Ron back out into the public. We all felt it was time that he get out in the public. The idea was, and I used to read the scripts. We'd write the scripts for what was going to go on and what shooting scenes were going to go on, and they would go through Liz to Ron or Mary Sue and be approved for the actions. And the idea was to get Ron out here in the community as a religious leader. In fact, I believe he did a couple of radio shows with some local Baptist ministers when they first came in here. And that the whole idea was, of course, to use the opinion leader policy of the church, which is to get a trained Scientologist alongside of someone who's not necessarily the governmental head of an agent, but who he listens to. Who do you go to when you need advice? As a counselor, you have people that you respect their advice. Well, it's a little too obvious to put a trained Scientologist in the mayor's office. But if you can find somebody that the mayor talks to and get a trained Scientologist next to him, boy, you're in good shape. You can just feed anything you want to along that line. And I assure you, that's done every day. I personally brought 60 people up to the governor's campaign in, I think it was 1974. I was asked by the Guardian's office to provide rehabilitation project force personnel to back one of the gubernatorial candidates in California. He lost, by the way, but nonetheless, I had him up there, and I got a commendation for it. I still have it, by the way, for my actions in bringing Scientology into more good favor in the state of California. And they flyers, and they had flyers and brought people into these this is the criminals that Scientology.
Clearwater, why not? I mean, was Clearwater the right size, being roughly 100,000 people? Was Tampa too big, or was, say, Brooksville too small, or?
Politics, sir. The reason we found some beautiful locations for the base in the Netherlands Antilles, and ran smack into a man who was in the Guardian's office at the time. I don't know if he still is. His name was Brian Rubinick, and Brian was always a little paranoid, but he was a Guardian's office personnel, and he was very, very afraid of the political situation in the Caribbean. At the time, as I recall, they were storing a lot of oil over there while we were having a warm winter and didn't need it here. So there was a lot of political things going on in that area to make sure that nobody knew there was more oil and gas around than anybody could possibly have dreamed of. So the political situation in every area that was looked at was very, very closely evaluated. You had a situation here at that time, as I recall, the tourist business wasn't doing all that good. There was plenty of property available at a good price. A lot of people wanted to get some money back for the investments that they made because Clearwater wasn't booming at the time. I believe that they did find some things to attack the mayor's office with at the time, although I was running in and out of Clearwater at the time, so I wasn't directly involved except for people who would tell me things in confidence because they knew that I wouldn't squeal on them if they told me something that they could get in trouble for. I understand a lot of the things that I heard from close personal friends who would have been in an awful lot of trouble had anybody known that they had disclosed what they were doing to me. In terms of the rules of evidence, I think you realize what that means. It's not hearsay.
So you investigated the personalities or the temperaments of the local officials and either appointed or elected when you came in?
No, the whole area. I understand a set of mission orders of the magnitude of, in fact, it was an LRH Executive Directive 500 series. I don't remember the last couple of numbers on it, but this was probably a 15 or 20 page set of step-by-step things that had to be done before the Guardian's office would approve the move. All right, so you didn't have the church just willy-nilly walk in here and sit down. All of these things were very carefully evaluated long before they went into Daytona and started getting in trouble there and moved up here. But as far as I'm concerned, from what I've been able to piece together from the people that I knew that were involved in it, this was just politically a nice place.
Naive town, or nice town. Before we get on the other questioners, you said that we're having a hearing against or for the Church of Scientology, and they are back in the office trying to figure out how to handle us. How do you think they may handle us?
Look for our budget.
What should I be aware of? And what should my colleagues up in this platform?
Well, I'll tell you, I sure wouldn't want to have any skeletons in my closet. I'll be very frank with you.
Now you tell me.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask him a question?
They're not of any value once they've been used.
If you got a phone call in the morning, the phone call consisted of, I heard you talking with the gentleman before. I know you have 2 daughters, and they go to such and such a school. Would you consider that a threat? If the facts in the case were the truth.
In my case, it certainly would be.
If that phone call came from me, would you take that phone call serious?
Oh, sure. In fact, it would already have gone past the point where you should have been doing something about it.
You mean if you were me, you would not be sitting here, you would be with your family?
You have been classified as an active enemy of the church. There are passive and active enemies, and this is part of the geointelligence training. And I've done their intelligence PR course. I've been trained how to handle you guys if I wanted to, if you were attacking me. In other words, I've been trained to present the church's position in a favorable manner. I've been trained to take everything that you say and turn it around against you if that's what I needed to do. In your particular case, they would have already classified you as an active enemy. You would have done something that impeded the expansion, the progress of Scientology, and you would have gone from somebody who was just in disagreement with the church or was interested in finding out what it was all right about into somebody who was doing something about it. The minute you became active, then you go under the area of observance of geointelligence. That's when they start gathering the data, when you become active. I didn't get sued until I testified, as long as I hid for 3 years after I got out, and the IRS didn't know where I was, and nobody bothered me. But the IRS found me, and I agreed to work with them. And as soon as I did, the day after I put my testimony in the record, it hadn't even been released yet.
Well, Mr. Burfield's
obviously arrived on my doorstep.
Concerned about some threats he has had. I have, unfortunately, no longer live with my family, but I'm concerned that too, and that's why I'm asking you, as a person who has done these things, how they should handle it. How may we expect to be handled?
Well, a friend of mine's daughter a week ago turned her in to the Church of Scientology for dealing with me and a bunch of other Scientologists who had gotten together outside of the authority of the church to discuss the things that they didn't like that were going on in the church. Her daughter is a Sea Org member and went straight into the church and turned her in for the activities, and they pulled her in and grilled her. In fact, she has a lot of money still with the church, so they sent a couple of registrars along with to try to get her to go back in here to Clearwater and get her quote-unquote case handled so that she would be no longer in disagreement with the church. That's a standard qualifications action. There's a qual division. Anybody that becomes disaffected with the church, their confessional folders are immediately gone through, and you attempt to get them back into session, being audited, and get them back in alignment.
A standard procedure then would be, before to stop these hearings, would have been to find skeletons in the closets of the 5 commissioners or possibly the attorney and the manager. Would that be the normal way of someone of influence to stop these hearings before they started?
If you want to know what the Church of Scientology will do to you, read The Art of War by Lao Tzu. Because that's one of the required books on the training manual for an intelligence operative.
The whole part of all of the intelligence operations, drills and policies, as I mentioned at the beginning and a number of times, will all be put into evidence. Some already have, but there are hundreds more to put into evidence.
Well, I've alerted my family just to watch themselves, and Mr. Burfield has alerted his family, and I'm sure the other commissioners have done the same, and letting them know that I know if anything does happen.
Sir, if I may, one of the points that Counselor just reminded me of that I wanted to bring up was that while I was on leave of absence from the church in Los Angeles, I was approached by a guardian staff member. My wife at the time, Reva Biddleman, had parents that lived in Miami. Her father had been a successful supermarket owner. They were very well known and thought of in the Jewish community. We were asked if we would consider infiltrating all of the local charities as fundraisers, using their father's influence in the community to get, go through the family ties, the lines, and what we were supposed to do was infiltrate the charities, do a lot of good fundraising things, bring some money in, and at the same time, impress the charities with our confidence and gradually gain some sort of control over them. It was decided about 3 weeks after we were approached that because we were so well known as Scientologists around the world, we had traveled extensively for 14 months for the church top management, bailing orgs out of financial trouble. So we had been approached, and they decided that we were too well known, so they were going to use somebody else to do it. I'd check your local charities. You may have somebody operating in there right now. I was asked to do it.
Okay, let's get on a different little track then. If you said if you could pass a lie detector test, you were trained to pass a lie detector test. If you're that well trained, could you then also pass an E-meter test?
Secretary.
That's the same thing.
Yeah. I know that. You trained people. To lie.
Yes.
To lie so convincingly and so convincingly well that you could pass the lie detector test.
No, that they could pass the lie detector test on whether they could do it or not. And they couldn't go out until they could. That's how well trained they were. They knew in no uncertain terms when they left that they could get through any customs officials and complete their mission. Customs officials, immigration officials, authorities, reporters, whatever. They knew their job cold. So cold that you could put them on a lie detector and they wouldn't read. When I say read, I mean the lie detector test would show that they were not lying when they said they could do it.
And how could you possibly fail the E-meter test when you were put back on that late for auditing?
Well, if you had something that you had done against the church and had never told anybody about, that would read on the lie detector. It's an area that you're not
only taught to lie for specific reason or job or mission.
Okay, there is a difference between active use of Scientology intelligence technology and the use of the E-meter to find out whether or not a person is doing what they're supposed to be doing. In one form, you have like a security check when somebody goes into a company. Often now companies like Radio Shack, Tandy Corporation now uses a lie detector test with regard to the application form that you fill out for employment. So it's in that order of magnitude. A staff member could be brought in at any time. H.C.O. Hubbard Communications Office had the right to call in any staff member and put them on the meter and find out whether they had been doing their job, whether they had been using Scientology standardly or not. And if they failed, take whatever measures necessary to correct that. On the other hand, you had training somebody so well that you knew that they could do their job, and to verify that they themselves knew that, put them on a lie detector. And if they didn't feel 100% confident, it would read. I can't begin to tell you how many hours some of these people spend. I'm sure you've all heard the term tone scale, emotional tone scale. Maybe you haven't gotten into any of that. Well, basically what it is it's a set of techniques where you can bring somebody emotionally up or emotionally down by being able to ascertain what they're basically not confronting in life, what they're not willing to face, take responsibility for. And I used to drill with flashcards with another Guardian's Office staff member on being able to move somebody involuntarily up and down that scale. Just by simply spotting where they were really coming from in terms of their ability to confront life. Those drills are constantly run on Scientology people that deal on public lines. They're done on auditors, and they're done on geointelligence personnel. Only they're modified with geointelligence personnel for situations like reporter. If there's a reporter bugging you, to just, take them up and take them down and just confuse the hell out of them and get them out of your hair. It's not all that hard to do.
That's the problem with the reporters.
And listen, I've worked in intelligence and naval intelligence, and it's not technology that's unknown in this world. It's just modified for the use of the church. It's not something L. Ron Hubbard just dreamed up on his own. It's standard intelligence procedure. Standard brainwashing technique.
When you took money out of the country in phony packages, did you take it out in cash?
The biggest incident that I know of personally was a $50,000 cash shipment that went to Flag when Alex Sibursky was called to Flag in 1971. There are other people that I know of that took it back and forth, but this is a situation where I was in the office and he said, yeah, I'm going to bring Ron $50,000. We had a good week. I think we made $500,000 that week for U.S. gross income. In fact, I don't know whether you know it or not, but when I left Scientology, the Church of Scientology in Clearwater, Florida, had a gross income of $500,000 to $700,000 a week. And I know you people didn't see any of that money.
Neither did the tax collector. How much are they skimming, do you think, in Clearwater?
Well, the policy of LRH is to try to run an organization on 25% or less of the gross income. Just how successful they are now or anything, I don't know. But I know a lot of staff members that ate potatoes and beans while there was money being shipped off to the Guardian's Defense Fund to handle the next enemy that they had created with covert operations.
So if you make $1 million, then you would be a week you'd be spending $250,000 here, and the rest would go to L. Ron.
It would be filtered probably through worldwide. When Flag was not here in Clearwater, of course, during the course of the IRS trial, there were some 20-some, or at one time 30-some bank accounts in other countries where money could be sent to. That came up in the IRS trial, and at the time we did that trial last year, they still had about 20 accounts that were active, still had money in them.
Well, a previous witness has said about 10% is taken off the top.
That's just to the Guardian Defense Fund. That's the combat kind of hearings we're having right now.
I will. Who gets to start off again? Mrs. Garvey?
I don't know where to start. I want to keep him.
Yeah. I have to get the plane at 5:30, so that's all the time I've got. I wish I could.
Okay, let me first just cover some of the things on this background or the outline that you've got. What one item here was C-check, Operation C-check. Underneath it's got e-meter lie detector.
It probably should be SEC-check, not C-check. That's a typographical error.
Security.
Oh, okay.
Security check.
Okay, you were the LA officer for the security check. Then you go down, there's one under large amounts of cash out of the United States, inflating OTC expenses. What's OTC, first of all?
Well, OTC was what Flag was outside of this country. When I first joined the Sea Organization, I thought I was joining the Church of Scientology Sea Organization to go through a ship's master training program. When I went into my initial training, the first thing I got was some policy letters or flag orders that told me what I had actually done was signed a contract with a corporation called Operation Transport Corporation. In the 1970s, there was another corporation which had been set up called Operation Transport Services, which was allegedly another corporation that provided management services and facilities that leased the ships to the Sea Organization. It was all one thing. It was OTC, OTS, Sea Organization, all the same animals. In fact, we had to take people who were new to Scientology that were going to flag, and that was part of my briefing job, was to brief them on the fact that they were really OTC when they got out of this country, and there was nothing anywhere in writing that could be used to prove otherwise. But OTC was always run by L. Ron Hubbard, and always has been.
I might note for the record at this point, this particular item has legal significance for a lot of different reasons, which will become plain for a lot of different reasons at a later time. And it has personal significance to Mr. Meister, because the Church of Scientology of California, which owned all the buildings, and the Church of Scientology of California, which is a corporate entity which owned all of the buildings in Clearwater, Florida until last December 13th, wrote a letter to Mr. Meister involving the situation on the death of his daughter, and under their letterhead of the corporate entity, they stated that, "I am sure you understand that the ship's company, an independent Panamanian agency, is under no obligation to the Church of Scientology of California to provide information that it might deem goes beyond the scope of a reasonable inquiry by bereaved parents. The independent Panamanian agency in the ship's company is the Operation Transport Corporation, of which the witness just referred."
Well, under the next one under that is billing Church of Scientology of Clearwater. I mean, you'd bill, for the operation of OTC, you'd bill the church.
Let me explain this to you. I have a letter, as a matter of fact, an OTC letterhead that introduces me as the captain on one of the vessels that was written by Lieutenant Commander Bob Young, who was the U.S. Fleet Captain at the time. He was a Sea Org Scientology staff member, but he was also, in terms of this letterhead, the U.S. Fleet Captain for the Board of Directors of OTC Limited Panama. I have the original with a seal, with the OT seal on it too. What would happen is the church, about once, either twice or once a month, they would do what was called financial planning. At that point in time, the people that were on the flagship would requisition monies for ship's operation. All right. I don't know if any of you have the remotest idea how much it costs to keep a ship going, but it's incredibly easy to have in a ship the size of the Apollo, which had about 400 crew members on it. It was roughly around 350 feet long. You can lose $80,000 in the engine room in the spare parts bin. Really simple. Food costs. You had an organization called OTS, which we were instructed to no longer mention, which was actually part of a church who was billing for services that it then delivered to OTC, and the people who were delivering the services were Scientology staff members and Apollo crew members. I don't think I have to go any farther with showing you how easy. There is another point, though. The church uses a finance system which basically breaks down into weekly income packets. Originally, there was supposed to be an invoice log in all church that showed when invoice packets and numbered were given to Treasury, so that the log, so that people couldn't mess around with the invoices. What it basically ended up happening was the church had Scientology printers that would print up a couple of sets of invoices, and I noticed after we did a convention audit in 1970 that I was a part of, and the IRS was making an inquiry into the church's finances at the time. I never saw a logbook in any organization after that point. All right? My wife's handwriting and later on in 74 was on invoices that she couldn't possibly have written. In other words, what I'm saying is these income packets can be pulled out on even so small a thing as a weekly basis, and totally altered, and there will never be a record anywhere else that says that there was any more money coming to the church. It's all on an invoice machine, and it's done deliberately.
The next question I was going again down this outline is talked about, mentions that you were placed in enemy condition. When was that? And we've all been hearing about RPF. What was RPF?
Well, it could be, you could be assigned to it, but primarily it had to do with a lot of crimes against Scientology. And those crimes could be things like not applying a policy letter when you should have, not having a good gross income for the week, not having it go up steadily. Maybe it went down for 6 weeks or something like that. So you could be pulled off of a post and put onto the rehabilitation project forces. You were held up to ridicule by literally everybody in the organization. You were not allowed to be communicated to or communicate unless you were first communicated to by somebody. I spent time in a bilge at one time for being late from coming off of Liberty. I spent 12 hours in bilge water that deep in the bottom of one of the ships, cleaning scum off of the hull because I was late, and I went without sleep at that particular time for about 36 hours getting my amends to the church for my crime of not being on my post in time. I observed people in a chain locker on the ship for a week on bread and water. A lady named Holly Judd at a place called American St. Hill Organization in Los Angeles spent something like 9 or 10 days in a closed room on bread and water, writing up all of her crimes against humanity for the last trillion years, and the ethics officer would throw them back into her and say that wasn't enough.
A point of correlation in terms of corporate policy, you may correlate that testimony that you just heard to the testimony of David Ray in the dumpster with the garbage up to his chest.
Right, right. You also kind of testify to that some of the undercover criminal operations as to breaking into offices, burglarizing, planting false information.
Well, that had to do
missions.
with the Bill Foster story. I mean, let's face it. I helped a man who was wanted by the federal government get out of this country, and I got him out real fast.
That's good criminal activity.
I don't know if the statute of limitations is up or not. I'm not here to defend myself. I've done what I've done, and you can make do with whatever you want to out of it. I'm here because I know of a lot of very, very decent people who have been jacked around by this organization. Their families disrupted. I have not been able to live in one place for the last 3 years. I've had to structure my whole occupation not around what I can do, but around what I am limited to doing in order to avoid my background with the church from being exposed to an employer. That's commonplace, and I would like to see people, like I said, the stuff I've got is nothing. There are people that I know of that have got things that would really curl your hair, and they're afraid to step out. And I hope that these hearings will... Guardian's office is a little short-staffed right now handling all of the flaps, and hopefully all of the things that happen will make them too undermanned to resort to anything silly like, physical harm to people. And the people who would like to come out, would like to resume their place in society and become productive members of a community, could come out and do it without being chastised for having made a mistake and joined the organization.
As the city's consultant and having been involved in the investigation of this organization for 3 years, I can tell you that the individuals, or some of the individuals to whom Mr. Mayor refers to, or many, have contacted my office. I am under confidentiality with regard to their identity, but I can simply say, as the city consultant in my investigation efforts, not only specifically for this project, but for the last 3 years, many, many, many such individuals would like, in fact, to come out, but they're in fear.
One of the vicious policies we've heard about in the past, and seems to relate to you also, is the disconnect with your wife. Mm-hmm. Was there something about Scientology materials demanding divorce?
Well, initially now this goes back to 1969 when I was on staff in Tustin, California. I was still married at the time. I was introduced to Scientology through a friend and heard lectures and so on and so forth. Because I had had a background in public speaking in the United States Navy, for some time I taught anti-submarine warfare techniques to Annapolis cadets that would come out on their training cruise. And understand, this was during the Vietnam War, and we were the flagship of the 7th Fleet. So part of my daily duties was to take a group of officers and train them on how to do various things. And so I had quite a bit of experience in talking with people. As a result of that, I was offered a job in the Tustin organization to teach their communication course. And I was just told that if I was willing to come in and do it, they wouldn't charge me for the course or anything. They'd give me the training on how to do it, and I would just do it. And I, subsequent to that, became their communication course supervisor, and I gave introductory lectures to the public every Friday night to get them to come in and sign up. So I was having a lot of marital problems at the time as a result of my association with Scientology, so I was asked to bring my wife in. There was an attempted handling on her. She was put on a meter and asked a bunch of questions and stuff. And after it was all said and done, she said, I didn't want any part of this. She didn't know why. She just knew that she did. I don't want to go into that any further, but as a result of that, I was considered to be what is called PTS, or a potential trouble source to the church. The policy very clearly says handle or disconnect. And I said, well, she's not going to become a Scientologist. That's right. What else is there to do? Disconnect. So at that point in time, you have to realize I had gotten into it to the point where I actually believed that part of my spiritual future was involved with the church. My wife was very heavily into drugs at the time, and I had just come off of them. In fact, one of the things that I had to do in order to get the job, I'm not going to try to tell you I came back from Vietnam in good shape. I didn't. And it was years before I stopped carrying a gun and knife. All right? So I had to write a letter promising that I would no longer use drugs and I was clean from it, in order to be allowed on staff. All right? So basically, my wife was just another one of you garden variety humanoids that was socked into drugs, and I was better off without her, and I went for it. Whether that was right or wrong is besides the point. I did. And that marriage was ruined as a result of my believing the church policy on the matter, that I couldn't reconcile the marriage unless my wife was a Scientologist.
For the record, that policy is Exhibit 2.
How much pay did you get over your average salary?
Well, I had a tendency to make a little more out of it because I had bonuses that I would get. I was a senior executive. But I probably didn't average more than between $14 and $20 a week for 6 years.
That was the first 6 years. And what about the latter?
Well, I got a few bonuses. I got a $125 bonus for raising the income in St. Hill when I went over there with my wife. And I tried to collect my earlier mission bonuses. Some of them were up to $200 for... Well, I went into Boston organization and brought the income up from about $2,000 to $60,000. I went into the Hawaii organization and brought the income up from about $600 or $700 to $16,000. Austin, Texas, from $9.50 to $3,000 a week. I was supposed to be getting bonuses for that. You know, just a nice little way to say thanks for your contribution.
How much bonus would you get?
I never got them.
Oh. How much bonus would you have gotten if you'd gone down to Mexico to take care of the bandits?
Well, if it was a power mission, in other words, there was no more problem, it could have been up to a couple $100, maybe $250.
Oh, that's good.
Well, when I say power, I mean there's no situation to be handled. It's terminatedly handled. In fact, that was what a mission was to do. You didn't go out to do a continuing handling on an area. You didn't go out to provide progress reports about what you were doing to overcome the situation there. You went out there and turned in a done. I handled it. Situation no longer exists. In fact, the success of a mission or not was judged on how well the income did for 6 weeks after I left. If it dropped, I hadn't trained the people that I put in to take over again well enough. And I would have been considered a failed missionaire. I would have been made mission ineligible. Quite frankly, I would probably had to do a few amends projects and gotten a lower condition assignment. there's just no end to it. I don't know how many incidences I could tell you of things like that to get across to you that it's common, everyday operating policy, always has been. I'm a little involved.
Well, how much influence were you by L. Ron Hubbard's background
I probably...
as getting in and staying in?
Well, an awful lot, because I had come out of the United States Navy. And I understand something. From the time I was a little kid, my father was an intelligence aide to the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon. He was with Army Intelligence for 25 years. All I heard about all my life was Army, Navy, war games, this sort of thing. And I had always wanted to be a captain of a ship. I had some success with navigation of the carrier, the flagship that I was on. And here was my chance. You know, it takes 8 years or more to get a certificate through the U.S. system. And at times it's questionable about who controls that through the maritime system. And here I was offered a chance to get my master's papers just by working, you know, in exchange for the work that I did. And in addition, I was promised that I would get business degrees. I've been very highly trained in business management techniques. I don't have a degree to show for it, and therefore, when I go out for a job now, I have to hide those abilities. I can't bring them out. I have no way of qualifying that, because if anybody calls OTC or the Church of Scientology to verify my employment, I'm the worst guy in the world.
I'm assuming that when you first started auditing, you assumed it was confidential. Did you do any auditing yourself once you realized it could be used against you?
You know, this is an interesting thing. I was so busy being trained and going around doing administrative things that I got very, very little Scientology auditing until my very last portion of time in the Sea Organization. I didn't go on the clearing course until I went to St. Hill in 75, which was probably 6 months before I got out. I went on a leave of absence. So consequently, I didn't necessarily at that time know an awful lot about the technology I was selling, but I sure had been trained to sell.
But you also were using auditing information.
Oh, certainly. Oh, well.
I mean, if you weren't audited, they wouldn't have had any information on you.
Well, no, not true. Okay. Not true. Every Sea Org member signs up, goes through security checking.
Okay.
On a meter. Your whole background. There's at the time I went in, they were calling it the Johannesburg Forum, and it was just pages and pages of questions about, you know, have you ever killed anybody? Have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? Have you ever infiltrated an organization? Are you here to infiltrate us? It's all done on a lie detector. All that data is then sent, and I was apprised of it at the time, that data would be sent to Worldwide, the Guardian's Office in Worldwide, for an international ethics clearance. If I passed, if they could not find any connection with what I had said on this forum, and I mean, they asked some pretty personal questions. My sex life in Scientology is so well documented that I can't even begin to care about it. It just wouldn't be worth it.
That's Exhibit 6 for the record, and the Commission has seen some of those questions.
Yes, right.
His sex life?
Yeah. The Church of Scientology has been after me for 3 years, and draw your own conclusions.
So to finish answering your question, all that initial data was sent to International Ethics in St. Hill, England. From that point on, if I ever got into any trouble with the church, and there were a number of occasions when I did get into trouble with various people, that information, in fact, at one point in time, Ron Hubbard said, okay, we're going to forgive you Scientologists, of all of the things you've done against the church so we can get on about our business. Well, they had us writing up things that we had done through our entire lifetime. I sat for probably 3 days trying to think up things all the way until, you know, chopping the vines off my mother's bushes, you know, when I was a little kid. And that wasn't enough. They came back to us and said, it's not finished, make sure it's finished. That all went to the Guardian's office and into our B1 files. And we had to do that to get the amnesty. We had to do that to get forgiven. And that was not confessional session was not done in session on a meeting. That was sit down and turn it over to the guardian's office when you're done. The assistant guardian of every organization collected them, and they were forwarded to the file.
So you mean everyone in Sea Org had to do this?
Any assistant guardian in any organization in Scientology can call up the technical secretary and order your folders brought in, your confessional folders brought into his office. He can have one of the guardian's office own technical trained people go over it, list all the crimes. That's how they get the B1 files. All a B1 file is a time track, a date-time sequence of all the nasties you've either done to others or Scientology. And it's right there on a cover sheet, and it's indexed just like a legal file. I'm sure you all have seen a legal file. Indexed just like it. So if you get into any trouble anywhere, that information can be used to bring you around in line.
Back to the question, though, knowing that...
Sorry, I'm sorry.
That's right.
I'll just make a point. As the evidence will show as we proceed, the processes of collecting information by which this organization collects information are not just limited to auditing information. They have, as Ms. Peterson testified, overt and covert data collection. And the essential purpose of all of these processes is to get information, whether you do it by breaking and entering or breaching a fiduciary obligation with regard to confidential auditing information.
The question I was trying to get at is, knowing that an auditing file will be used against you, would not be kept confidential. Did you take any auditing after that?
Oh, sure.
Why?
Well, if I had refused auditing, I would have been refusing to apply Scientology myself, and I would have been expelled.
Okay, that's pretty funny.
You know, I'd like to just, since I'm on the subject, I myself have used the data in a person's confessional folder against them. Right? On one of the missions I did with a flag member, it was a flag-originated mission. The flag was not in Clearwater at the time. We went to Hawaii. There was a staff member there. I had been doing some stuff with some animals. The woman that was sent, she was in the country illegally, by the way. She was sent with me. We brought the guy in the office and just laid it out in front of him and said, you know, you either get on this thing or you're going to be expelled, and that's your spiritual future. I've done it myself.
Were you promised any kind of cures for problems at any step of the way?
I was promised that I would become an immortal being, capable of operating with or without a body. That means in actually controlling, being able to control things and create effects in a room such as this without having to be physically present.
That's religion. That's offering.
Yeah, that could be characterized as religion, being an immortal person.
Oh, the rest of you, sir.
How about your any type of physical conditions or
Wait, what about Paul Hatchett?
Yeah.
Well,
Did I have it?
Following with
I'd rather fall in line.
I'm sorry, man, I was just trying to follow up with Mr. Gardner.
Yeah.
I've lost track of what the question
Any physical ailments that they promised that they'd cure, any mental problems that they promised that they would cure? For you in particular?
Arthritis, not for me in particular, no.
But they did promise other, I mean, that was standard practice.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
The arthritis, the cancer,
That's
headaches.
standard. I mean, in fact, that's a very well-publicized bit of information in Scientology, that the medical profession itself will admit to 70% plus of illnesses being caused by psychosomatic conditions within a person, and it was always hinted that, in fact, it was 100%. You know, and that Scientology, well, Ron has stated it on tapes. He has it all taped. The road out of all that stuff is already well mapped. We're the only ones that have it. We don't owe it to anybody else, and they're going to pay for it. That's part of the training that you receive as a Sea Org.
Okay, Paul Hatchett, I'd like to hear from you, sir, if you have a question.
Mr. Mayor, you were a senior executive, you know, 7 long years. You got really close to Mr. Hubbard, personally. Did you not?
I worked directly with him on some projects, but I wouldn't say that I was a close personal friend of Mr. Hubbard's, no.
Okay, well, this Apollo, apparently it was used for retreats, right? Was it ever used for a retreat while you were captain of it?
I was the ship's manager of the Apollo. It was not a retreat. It was a training center where high allegedly high-level services could be delivered to church parishioners. And that could be anything from a flag executive briefing course, which was how to make a super executive for an organization, to some of their spiritual counseling. It could be, we used to routinely send, in fact, we would be ordered at times and billed for it to send staff members from various churches for special management training courses, management rundowns, big league sales courses. Registrars would be sent to get a big league sales course, which would teach them how to effectively handle opposition to them selling Scientology. I sold Scientology as a flag service consultant myself for a while.
Okay. Were you ever aboard the Apollo, if it ever sailed through the Mediterranean, Africa, or anywhere?
No, not there. No.
Just the eastern part of the United States?
Yes.
Okay. Can you give me an idea of some ports you stopped in along the eastern coast?
Well, the only ports that I was involved in before I left was basically the Netherlands Antilles area, the Aruba, Curacao, Bonaire. And I was subsequently sent off on mission from there before I was able to do anything else or go into any of their ports with them. They were, at that time, they were in the process of getting ready to come into the United States or go somewhere to have a flag land base.
Okay. Thank you. If I understood you correctly in your testimony, you mentioned something about you were aboard ship and you observed people being in chain lockers.
Yeah, a chain locker is where the anchor chain goes down into. It's a very rusty, scummy, dirty area of the ship because the mud that comes up from the anchor chain and through the hawse pipe goes down, falls down into it. So they're notoriously the filthiest places you can find on a ship. Well, that's where somebody would be sent to think it over.
Okay.
You get bread and water until you come out and your thinking's in alignment with the goals and purposes of the group.
Can you just tell me a little bit how you really defraud the American government through customs?
How you really? How regularly?
How you?
Well, because there were regular shipments that went from all of the churches in, for instance, the United States. At the time I was active in the church, sent all of their weekly income statistics, how much they'd spent, how much they made, how many hours of auditing they had delivered, sent it to the central location, which was called a Flag Operations Liaison Office. From there, all the data would be compiled, checks, whatever they were going to send, and I went to a place within that liaison office called External Communications. The person who directly ran external communication was the only person that was allowed to know either where the flagship was or where to send that material to another liaison office so it could be then forwarded on to the flagship. So you're talking about everyday trips out to the airport. Everyday trips out to the airport, maybe anywhere from 6 to 10 couriers a week going out. And this is for years. So there's just an incredible amount of Scientology traffic all around the world. And most of it is done under the guise of tourism or students. I sent Japanese nationals to the United States for training when I ran a project in Tokyo, Japan. Gee, it was easy to get a Japanese to sign a billion-year contract because they sign lifetime contracts over there anyway. If you asked them to go to work for 3 years, they'd think you were crazy. You see, so it was really easy to sign them up, and all we would do is provide them with a letter for immigration stating they were either coming for a visit or they were going to get some training at the local church, and then they would be, well, most of them didn't stick around. What was really funny was the living conditions was too crowded for even the Japanese.
They're small people.
Thank you.
Tony?
Mr. Mayor, we've had testimony before about that there are certain groups which are in the church now, which were referred to as front groups, which include a Jarrah Society for the elderly, supposedly to provide social types of services to the community, were actually located under the Guardian's office.
Right.
I don't know what they were called at the time you were in the church, but was it...
I can tell you one right now that has to do with children, applied scholastics.
That one's still in, yes.
All right. A good friend of mine, Amanda Ambrose, who was at one time a singer, and her husband, Bill Goins, Amanda was a Sea Org member. I worked with her. She worked originally out of a Celebrity Center. We socialized together. She's a black singer. She did a very successful run in one of the productions in Los Angeles. The name escapes me, but she was loaned by the Sea Organization to the Guardian's office as the executive director of Applied Scholastics. Her husband was the educator. In other words, he had all his degrees, all his qualifications and stuff. But she was the one that ran the show, and she was a Sea Org member. She took her orders, her project, from the Guardian's office. And she was a Sea Org member on loan to them as the executive director of Applied Scholastic. That's a direct incident that I know of, because I took one of my friend's children that were having trouble with reading, had them put through the program.
What was the basic purpose of those kinds of programs? Do you know at the time?
Infiltration in the community. I think maybe I could sum this all up with a quote from LRH that I got out of one. I think it was control of. It's called SCS. Start, change, drop. The mechanics of control. And it comes from chapter 14, and it says, "Man has too long suffered under a school of thought, miceology, which teaches one to conform to the environment. The Scientologist, however, knows that the real victory can only be achieved by commanding the environment, and this is the task we have on our hands." That's a direct LRH quote. And I'm talking about your community being infiltrated on a regular basis by psycho-political operatives who have been well-trained. That is the basic simplicity, and everything that I have said today is to try to drive that point home to you. It is no accident. I trained some of them, and I went on some of the missions, and I've done it. And now I would like to see that facade all broken apart, because Scientology does not deliver what it promises.
Mr. Merritt, you had referred before that down below your office when you were here in Clearwater, that there was a department that was actually changing invoices and had an invoice machine and so forth. Would I be correct in saying that they did not keep regular types of accounting books of any kind?
Oh no, there's specific policy forbidding it.
So there are no books which say, or ledgers which show...
Standard accounting procedures are forbidden. It's too easy to reconcile.
They can be tracked.
Every sale that is made by the church is written down on, at one time it was 4-part, and I believe it's 5-part now, invoice system. One of the invoices is supposed to be a running record. Okay, it's supposed to be unbroken, but the fact of the matter is that they're broken up into weekly and monthly packets so that they can be retrieved very easily. All right? Various copies go to various places in the organization. A copy would go to the Publics Division, so that name would be on file and that person could be contacted for services later on. A couple of the parts were kept. One went into the purchasing file, so we would know who the vendors were we bought from and prices and things like that. The other one was, of course, your regular copy that you save for your records. Other than breakdowns done for the Guardian's office, there were no ledgers kept as you would in standard bookkeeping procedures. And as a result of what I went through with the church and what I testified to in the IRS hearing, those documents are very, very easily changeable. All you have to do is take out 1 week's income packet and slap in a new one, the same number. And when you got your own printers and printing press, it's pretty easy to make 2 sets of invoices, or 3, or 4. I can't prove to the extent that they did it, but the figures that I gave the IRS in terms of the church's overall income during the time I was responsible for it did not jive with the reports of the Church of Scientology, and they're still looking for the money.
Gosh.
well, that's just, okay, cash flow goes from the church to the banking officer. Every organization has an assistant guardian for finance and a flag banking officer, a finance banking officer. The finance banking officers are under the charge of Commodore's staff for finance, which was last year Fran Broker, and each organization has an assistant guardian's finance, and that data goes up through worldwide to Herbie Parkhouse, who is the guardian of the church's funds. And then from there, those reports are sent back to Mary Sue's line, wherever she happens to be. For a while, it was here in Clearwater. And the point I'm getting at is that that money is traceable from the organizations directly to the flag land base, or wherever flag is, or Mary Sue, or whoever's in charge of finance. I understand it is a policy of the Sea Organization to be Fabian, to put an organization like St. Hill there that you think is the organization that runs the church on a worldwide basis, and while you're busy trying to get something out of them, all of the records can be put on a ship and moved somewhere else in the world. One of the jobs that I had as a station ship captain on the West Coast was to have that ship ready at any time to go into L.A. Harbor and cart all the files off. Plus whatever executive staff we could fit on the ship to take them. Part of the land base was to have that land base in Mexico where we could scoot into L.A. and load them all up. The Excalibur was bought for that purpose, to load the executives and files off and right down the coast into Ensenada and set it up and moving on out from there.
You'll recall where I stated earlier that all of the red box data, some probably 80 to 100,000 documents, were missed by the FBI because they went first to one location and the red box data was somewhere else.
Mr. Mayor, you had indicated that you worked with the IRS on their particular tax case in Los Angeles, and also had worked with some legal research, I believe you said, to the city attorney?
Well, that's private. I do legal administration.
Right. I was just going to ask, though, have you testified before any other governmental agencies, or have you talked to any federal authorities, like from the Postal Service or
for the last several years, the only two people, and I say people because I'm grouping Mr. Flynn and his associates together, the only two persons that I've known where I am, including my family a great deal of the time, was Martin Cohn of the IRS and Mr. Flynn and his associates. And whenever I would move, I would call them up and tell them how to get in touch with me in case they have it. You have to understand, I was very reticent to testify for a long, long time because I wanted to have a chance of enjoying my life after I did so. And I think that there's been enough light shed on the operations of the church now where they'd have to be a fool to start knocking people off. And I know people, I know a person that was asked to do away with somebody that's still out there. And Mr. Allard, who testified in the IRS trial, had been searched for by that person for quite some time, and they actually met. So there are people, I went through a self-defense training course with one of the Guardian's Office black belt people when I went to be Quentin Hubbard's bodyguard. You know, and I said, well, I've already had self-defense training in the service and so on. And he said, well, listen, what do you think they're going to, you better be able to defend yourself. What do you think that they're going to do when they find out what you guys are doing? You better know how to defend yourself.
This is really, I don't think, have anything to do with our hearing, but do you have any idea of what did in fact happen to Quentin Hubbard?
I have a very strong personal feeling about what happened to Mr. Hubbard based on some things that were told to me in confidence from his confessional folder by my wife, my ex-wife.
Wow.
And I don't know whether I'm right to get into that area or not.
We don't have to hear that. That's immaterial to these hearings.
I don't believe it.
Thank you. I don't have any questions.
All right, Jim Calderbank, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on something Mr. Burfield has been using quite a bit, and that's number one, your credibility, Mr. Mayor. You've come before us and talked about, and I want to get this straight first, you've talked about some very, very criminal acts, conspiracies, racketeering charges, international crimes. And, you know, you have to first see who's saying it.
What's that?
You have to first try to establish who is saying it. Now, you've been a witness for the IRS in their tax cases?
Yes, sir.
Was that under oath, and was the testimony utilized extensively in their case?
Yes, sir.
What is your reason for coming here today?
Because I want to go back to living a normal life. And there are an incredible amount of decent people that went into Scientology in good faith and have been betrayed. And they are no longer able to live normal lives, and they have to fear for their family because of the fact that they're afraid of getting bumped off for what they know. And that's what it really boils down to. I'm probably being really, heavily bearing on this fact, but I don't let anybody know where I'm living, and I can't get married until I'm certain that I know that my daughter, who's well hidden somewhere, and my wife B are going to be able to live a normal life. And if you want to know about my credibility as an executive, I have it in writing from Ron Hubbard. I have it with me, and you're welcome to a copy.
Okay. On that many people, as Mr. Mayor just referred to, our office has encouraged many people and told them that perhaps the best approach to the whole problem to which he just referred is to go public, to be public in the public light, and that may be in fact forever their best protection.
Mr. Meyer, that wasn't on you personally. It's just that we've asked that of every witness, because while the city of Clearwater might be well educated as to what has been happening over the years from the documents all the way to this hearing, there are other people and other government agencies after this that may be looking at these hearings, and they're not as familiar with this type of thing as we are. So that's why for each witness we try to also establish some credibility.
You have to realize, too, that during the course of the IRS trial, I have been through all of the federal government's documents on Scientology. I mean, stacks of them. I read them all. With regard to the other thing, I have a letter from L. Ron Hubbard to my ex-wife and I. It states, I quote, "I want you and Scott placed where you can do the most for Scientology. You are both very capable executives, and you will know how rare this is." And it's signed by L. Ron Hubbard, and it's dated 12th of July, 1975.
You were talking about records and how quickly they can be moved, destroyed, falsified, changed. If this is true, when you do get records, and are records meticulously kept of times, places, people, how do you tell which records are true and which records are false?
Well, I guess that would be in relation to the area you were examining. I personally would not look at it. I was sitting in an office with Marty Greenberg, who was the CPA for the church, when he told us how they were impeding the IRS investigation.
That's Marty
So I
Greenberg.
certainly wouldn't place any confidence in their financial records at all.
You're saying when the IRS was investigating the Church of Scientology, the church employed a CPA that actually falsified the records?
Yeah, he's a member of the Guardian's office.
And you also said that there are many ways...
He wasn't available for testimony during the IRS trial for some reason.
That's Mr.
That when these couriers went through customs, were any caught?
In one particular incident that I recall, one of the couriers misplaced a package with about $25,000 that was coming into Los Angeles, and I believe it was recovered, but it was lost on a plane for a while. I don't know of any incident where anybody was caught in terms of it as a crime.
What did Mr. Foster do then? You stated that you helped him escape from the country when he was under federal indictments, or when he had warrants out for his arrest. Can you get into that?
Yes, but I wanted him connected to the church when I did it. Do you understand? Because he was very, very afraid of being left high and dry. So I sent him out as a church staff member into Canada, across the border as a tourist. And in actual fact, he was going to take over an organization in Canada at that time, and did so.
But what was his, what did the officials in this country want him for?
Breaking and entering. He was part of the team that did all of the busting into the newspaper offices and Mr. Flynn's offices at the time. His cover had been blown. Was it not your office at that time?
And, okay, let's get back to the money leaving the country. You said most of the money either came through FLAG or was generated from FLAG, which is Clearwater, Florida?
Well, you're talking about a 7-year time span where in the exact location of FLAG many, many times.
Right.
What I was telling you about was the procedure, and this is what I think is really important, because we're dealing with day-to-day business activities, a system that is used to take records, money, anything, personnel, transport personnel, under the guise of one thing when in actuality it was another thing. I could not testify, for instance, as to the exact number of thousands of dollars that were couriered out. I just know we didn't have it to spend in Los Angeles after we made it. It was gone.
And in which money was this? How did they get the money?
Well, you understand that all the incomes of every organization are reported to the Guardian finance personnel and the banking officer on a weekly basis. Those persons, for instance, Mike Smith was the flag banking officer at the time. He was U.S. flag banking officer, would be given quotas. He would be telex quotas of money to send to flag. And as a result of what requirements were, I would be required to brief couriers to have that sent out.
One more clarification for the record. In 1970 and 71, I was in the law firm of Bingham, Dana & Gould. I am not currently in that law firm. One of the Guardian's office operations was to steal documents from the firm of Bingham, Dana & Gould, to which I am no longer affiliated. At the time, of course, I didn't know it. I didn't know anything about the Church of Scientology. The individual who was involved in that particular operation, or some of those operations, is in the courtroom. But a distinction has to be made in the record between my present office and the firm of Bingham, Dana & Gould, to which I used to be attached.
Okay, you mentioned a lot of military references, mission, elimination, check operatives, security checks, mission completed, that type of thing. Did you ever see or use any stolen government equipment? How did you get these intelligent procedures from the U.S. government?
Where Mr. Hubbard got his original information, I have no idea. What I was referring to is these are techniques which you yourself, as a hearing committee, can go out and research and read about yourself. Now, the point I was trying to make is that they're not something that was just dreamed up out of the sky as some super technology. It's pretty standard stuff.
I'm very interested in that. What would you say as your final comment to the people in Clearwater? You said you wanted to remove the facade. What would you say to Clearwater? What would you say to the Pinellas County tax authorities? What would you say to people that should be interested in the Church of Scientology?
I've got probably about 8 or 9 points down here. I think that I understand something. Having worked with a municipal government, like I said, I'm on call to environmental services in Los Angeles and the city attorney's office, so I'm familiar with the task force types of activities. The city of Santa Monica has established within the civil advisory department of the city attorney's office a office called Consumer Affairs, whereby people in the community who have been mistreated by businesses in the community may call up and make a complaint, and they will be contacted by the Consumer Affairs person, and a hearing will be settled and arbitration will be attempted. I recommend that very highly to this city, unless you can provide a communication line in someplace safe for all the people that are sitting over there at that hotel right now would get out if they thought they'd stand a chance of making it, without getting hung for criminal activities. I think they'd start coughing up like crazy. And they've got stuff that I never even, came close to doing.
My last question is what the mayor was asking about why you moved into Clearwater. It's just a personal question. You'd mentioned about politics when they came in, and at the time the city commission, did they feel either by having skeletons in the closet or by inactivity that they would not be as hotly pursued?
Well, I can't answer that in terms of what they or the operations officers at that time were doing. The simplicity of it is that it is the goal of Scientology to make every single person on this planet a Scientologist, and to get technology that Scientology has, both administrative and counseling technologies, integrated into the society, and every single person who signed one of those billion-year contracts was willing to put their life on the line to make sure it happened for a billion years.
You asked him a question, Mr. Koldevang, and I don't know if you completed your answer, Mr. Mayor, but you asked him for advice, and you were going to give us 8 or 9 points.
Okay.
I'd like you to give us those 8 or 9 points.
All right.
And also advice on what we should do if we feel there may be dirty tricks up the road.
Okay, well, I firmly believe that you should have either a volunteer or someone appointed to operate from the city attorney's office from that area in terms of a consumer complaint line. And you're talking about when somebody plops down $80,000 to come to Flag, and I've sold packages that big, to come here to get services, and they don't get them, where are they going to go to deal with that? Religion or no religion? And I don't believe for 1 second that Scientology is a bona fide religion. So,
we don't want to get into that.
So there ought to be a place where somebody that's mistreated by the church can call to get some assistance, to be able to lodge a formal complaint. Unethical sales practices are unethical sales practices no matter what product you're using. I think that a hotline could be established, much like the hotlines that people use for turning in crimes, or if there's a suicide hotline or something like that. Perhaps one of those lines could be made available to people who have complaints or are being what they feel they're being held against their will. And I think that those kinds of calls, once the person is safely outside of the ordinance, I think that stuff should be publicized. Perhaps halfway houses could be contact a volunteer to provide a place to stay for a staff member that wanted to have a reasonable chance of getting to that airport and out to back with them. Some of them haven't seen more than $10 in their pocket for years. And most of that was spent on, little things they just need to, so where are they going to get the money to get out of here? All you do, you see, when you allow them to stay here, is you allow the guardian's office to get into its thing about handling them and continue to make this sort of thing grow. So if there was a reasonably safe line established where people who wanted to get out, Scientologists who didn't want to be in your community could get out, that would be really great for them. I think you could have a research team look into legitimate counseling techniques, legitimate professionals in the area that could be called upon to do volunteer work, or it could be advertised or promoted by your city information area to let people with problems know that there are legitimate counseling groups around that can help them, so they won't have to feel like they have to stay within the Church of Scientology in order to handle whatever it is that's bothering them. There could be a list published of where people could go. I think that you could well make use of your fire, your zoning, your building inspectors to ensure that the regulations, the municipal ordinances that you have are complied with. And I very heartily advocate that those are surprise frequent, not standard inspections, but they'll be done on a basis where you just walk in and it's through it and you list the violations and they're recorded and you issue your warnings and so on and so forth, and come back and check it out. Right? Not only when it was supposed to be done, but maybe a week after it was supposed to be done and you received evidence. Go back and see if it's still there. You might have 10 people in the room that you certified as now being habitable. A week after they've reported compliance. So I think you could use those ordinances to the main point that I'm trying to make here is that if you are willing to be responsible for making Scientology behave in an ethical manner in this community, they are going to have to do it. I don't think that they have the guns anymore. I think there's too many people leaving the church too fast for them to cover all the areas that they're already in non-compliance with in terms of local regulations. I think you could inform the customs officials out here, or immigration officials, that there are regular shipments of people that come in and out, allegedly as students or tourists who are not in the country legally. And make sure that check out and see whether or not there are 4 or 5 different businesses out here at the Tampa airport that don't really exist but are shipping out Scientology materials, money.
Mr. Meyer, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Burfield, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just a few. Mr. Meyer, you made mention to these files that were brought in here about the size of this room. Last time you were in Clearwater, do you know if those still existed?
The last time I was here in Clearwater, I used them.
You used those files?
Sure, I was being briefed here for a mission. I went out of here on missions to go handle another area of the world. All of the data on those organizations resided here. It was used to evaluate the situation so somebody could determine that I had to go in the first place. Somebody didn't just indiscriminately call me from a job of fixing up the flagship Apollo to send me to South Africa to handle a situation. There were a lot of reports that were sifted through, evaluated. The local political scene in South Africa, at the time I left when 20,000 Africans were marching on Johannesburg during the Soweto riots. I got out of town the day that happened. All right, so the political scene was evaluated, and I was ordered to get out of there. So it's no accident that those files were there. They were used for the purpose of evaluation church operations.
But these files that we're making reference to are files that are here in Clearwater that cover people all over the United States, possibly all over the world, and they're files that could be used for covert actions. Is that correct? Blackmail or whatever you wish to call it.
Anything you want to do with them. Well, yeah, that's true. You made a good point. That would be pursuant to the policy of the church at the time.
Whatever the church policy, there's sufficient information in these files to do just about anything.
Understand that church policy is a very malleable tool. All right, there is a staff of people that have worked under Ron Hubbard and Mary Sue to carry out their intentions, their goals and purposes on a planet-wide basis. Every little treasury secretary in every organization around the world reports at least once a week to a guardian's office staff member and a flag staff member here in Clearwater that is responsible for that area. Here it would be like CS3, Commodore's staff. Commodore's staff means I do this action for L. Ron Hubbard. That's the job. And the assistant for that area evaluates the overall international scene with all the other assistants from various areas to come up with what is called a weekly battle plan. And that's not misnamed either. It is a weekly battle plan of how Scientology is going to be expanded in all of its operations all over the world.
This is just kind of a curious question. Did you ever get your mate's papers? Or
I have them. I have
U.S. Customs, or U.S. Coast Guard papers, or?
No, I am registered as a captain in the Honduran and the Panamanian Merchant Marine.
Do you know, you had mentioned, I call them shell or front or paper companies. Do you know whether or not Church of Scientology has any shell or paper companies here in the state of Florida?
At the present time, no. I haven't had anything to do with Clearwater since I left in 76. 76.
Now, I don't mean to sound harsh on this, but I mean, what you have told us, you have a tremendous background in Scientology, and have given us a lot of facts and figures. And one of the things that Mr. Calderbank just tried to elicit from you, and I'm not sure we got it all from you, is with all of this information and the fact that your family or your child is life's at stake, and possibly your future's at stake, what would provoke you from coming down here? Not provoke you, what caused you to come down here? If I can go a step further.
Howard dies 1,000 deaths, and I don't intend to run from Scientology for the rest of my life. We're going to have it out. That's all there is to it. I'm not going to destroy my life. I'm not going to be away from my family. I'm not going to remain away from my daughter because there's some organization that puts out the picture to everybody in it that it's powerful enough to come around and do them in if they don't play ball. And I think it's time for that kind of stuff to stop. I made it through Nam. My life's been blessed since then. All right? I don't have anything to lose except my life. And I've lived a very full life. And I don't intend to spend the rest of it running from the Church of Scientology, period.
Story that... The story that you have told us sounds like something one of our news media might be able to write if they took the time. And I guess what I'm trying to say to you is it is so fictitious, or not fictitious, it is so fantastic and incredible, and as Mr. Calderbank just said, bizarre, that unless the people are watching television,
they can't see the forest for the trees.
This story will not get out to the public. How can we get it out to the public?
You guys have just scratched the surface. You haven't even touched any of the good stuff yet. You're just getting to it. And hopefully what's going on here will bring people out of the woodwork that can tell you stories that make my stuff look like small potatoes.
One other question that I have, and then I'll leave you alone because it appears like I'm trying to crucify and chastise you. Did you know what these hearings were about before you came down here?
All I knew was that hearings were being conducted. There were people that I had known in Scientology that were going to be here, and well, I made my commitment when I agreed to testify for the IRS. Commander Bob Young, who I was in business with at the time, a business outside of Scientology, where we were in business together, was also approached by the IRS. Mr. Young chose to take a trip around the world and become no longer visible to the Church of Scientology. And I had to decide at that time whether I wanted to stay in hiding another 3, 4, 5, 6 years until somebody found out enough about what was going on to give me a running chance. Now, I'm not asking for police protection the rest of my life. I just want a reasonable chance to be able to continue it without having to be looking over my shoulder all the time, or worry about whether my daughter is going to get into some kind of trouble in school or whatever. Maybe it's only a possibility, but would you take the possibility with your daughter?
That's not even a good question with my daughter.
Well,
just a couple questions, then I'll leave. You had mentioned the possibility of a safe haven for counseling or something like this, and this is one of the questions I'd asked several of the previous witnesses. Where did they feel that they could go, in the city to feel safe? And most of them, the answers that I can recall getting out on, that mentally they felt they couldn't go anywhere.
well, they're supposed to feel that way. So, I mean, if this is the mecca for the most advanced technology on the planet for altering a person's life, then where else could you go? And that's the whole point that I'm trying to bring about. You're supposed to be at the only place you can go for help in the whole world, in the universe for that matter. And all the rest of you guys are bad guys. You're just simple, everyday garden variety humanoids. And you haven't got what it takes to do the job. And that is the attitude that Scientologists come here with. You are the enemy. We're the Oriental gentlemen, wogs. I don't think you feel that way, but when I was in Scientology, I treated you like that. and got commendations for it.
One parting comment, and I don't know whether you had it written down or it was off the top of your head there, and I couldn't take it down fast enough, and that was that you had trained all of these people to commit these acts, and you were concerned about the people of Clearwater.
The people of Clearwater?
Yes.
I think the people of Clearwater are going to deal with Scientology for a long, long time. How effective you are in it, I don't know. I've tried to give you some suggestions about it. But understand, when I left Scientology, I left 8 years of friendships, people that I love and respect, who I know came into the Church of Scientology with good intentions to do something constructive for mankind, for the communities that exist or that they were a part of, for their friends and their family, and they have been sold down the tubes. I can't talk to people that I dearly love now because they're still in Scientology. If I got anywhere near an organization, I'd have more Guardian's Office staff members around me than Carters have liver pills. They are forbidden to communicate to me. Now, I don't know how long I got to sit and take that kind of crap. I think I'm done with it. I may have to continue on and go through more hearings and stuff like that, but sooner or later, people that I know and love and who in turn love me and respect me that are in the church are going to graduate from Scientology. And if I've done anything to help that along, that's what I'm here for.
Would you, and this is it, would you say that the health, safety, or welfare of the people in Scientology, that their health or their safety or their welfare is at risk or in danger?
Oh, they're ill-fed, they're ill-housed, they're ill-clothed, they get horrible dental care, they get horrible care for their children. I have a personal friend, Christopher Penny, that was left in the middle of one of their Scientology drug rundowns, incomplete, and committed suicide a couple weeks before I could get to him in Hawaii. Yvonne Jentz, who is no longer with us, was a very, very close friend of mine. In fact, part of the problem I got into with the Flag people was I was trying to go to her office and be in her office. She's dead now because she depended on Scientology technology to cure a tumor. I can't ever talk to that woman again. She's dead because she went to a Scientologist instead of a doctor. That doesn't indicate danger. I don't know what does.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for having discussion.
I just have two quickies. You mentioned Marty Greenberg. Does Marty Greenberg keep and maintain an accurate list of the income paid into the organization?
I couldn't answer that question. I don't know the extent of the files that the church keeps in L.A. at this point in time. It's been too many years.
But if you cake in all this money and you put it in one big hat, somebody must know what the records are, even though they may not be the records that you and I would recognize as accounting one, accounting principles.
I'm sorry, I don't...
Somebody must maintain records, some sort of a records. They may not be recognized standard accounting principles.
How much money is coming?
Well, all the organizations would have in their treasury bureaus, they would have invoices. There are copies of invoices. Remember I told you it was like a 5-part form? They would have their copies and stuff. Right? Now, they might be ordered to send all of those copies to Flag, or a mission might come in like it did in the early 60s and change all of those records, or in the late 60s, change those records. I mean, how hard is it to take out a week's worth of invoices and put in another set when you've got $9.50 a week labor costs?
Okay. Within the organization, do you think that they would ever disown Mrs. Hubbard and the other 8 or 9 that were convicted?
Well, you want my personal...
well, that's all I can ask
yeah.
first.
I believe that it depends on how well they've gone about disappearing the money that everybody's suing them for now. In other words, I firmly believe that if it was to the best interest of the top management of Scientology to disconnect Scientology, to disestablish it, to do it in an instant, I don't think for a moment that they would stop operations. You might not have a church of Scientology, but there would be something else. And then again, there have been an awful lot of government agencies for a lot of years trying to nail them down and haven't done a very good job of it. So how long do you think it's going to go on? It's anybody's guess. I know that they've been taking 10% of the organization's income for many, many years and putting it in the Guardian's Defense Fund specifically to handle all this kind of stuff.
Can Scientology exist without deception and fraud
I don't know how.
as a viable organization?
Because it couldn't compete in the rest of the mental health community.
That's a good, all right, good answer. One final one. What would you compare this organization to that you've known and read about in your life?
I think it. See, you have to realize something. My father operated in the intelligence community. I have told him stories that when I first started getting heavy training, he used to just. I mean, he was shocked at how I was being trained, and we would sit down and go over how those techniques were the same kind. My father did security for the Nuremberg trial, so he's no slouch. You know, he was an intelligence advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Pentagon. I have never had any problem asking him a question about whether or not this was an intelligence technique and getting an answer out of him. He wrote some of the training manuals. All right? So you are dealing with an organization that has taken the most effective techniques of all the intelligence services, not only taken those techniques and used them to train their own personnel, but then taken those personnel and put them in those organizations as operatives. I've heard, for instance, Artie Mirren brag about people in Congressman's office that called up and reported to the Guardian's office on a daily basis, secretaries and things that were smuggled in. I personally know of a couple of ladies that were from Vermont that were on a senator's line that routinely gave information to the Guardian's office. So they're much more effective in most cases because of the fact that they operate under the illusion of a religion. So you can't touch them.
And we can't talk about that either.
Exactly. That's my point.
That's right. So we are slightly emasculated, too. Thank you very much. You're a very bright, articulate man. All right. Well, one quickie. Mr. Hatchett would like to ask you about something that
Mayor, I purposely left this question to the end. As I observe the Fort Harrison operation and see people going back and forth, I don't see what I physically would identify as minorities, you know, in the Church of Scientology in any level. Because I only know about the Clearwater operation outside, you know, what I've observed. Can you account for this reason in any way? We thought that they were streetwise, and we defined that one time. Okay?
I know it's true. I was born in Chicago.
Right. All right, can you respond?
I went to school through, I fought my way to school through your neighborhood.
All right.
I know what streetwise is.
All right.
I think you're probably quite correct. I don't know of an awful lot of black people or minority people in Scientology. I don't know what the statistics are. Certainly over the last 6 years, there were very few when I was involved.
You see, I was thinking about for the low wages, you know. You talk about a labor force. We've been accustomed to that for years and years.
It's rough when you get paid less than unemployment, isn't it?
Right.
We want to thank you.
You just don't go for them, I guess, make some money.
Being a good witness and being very articulate and have very engaging personality and very intelligent and shedding a lot of light on the issue. We have 4 more witnesses to see in the next 2 hours, so let's take a little quick break, and then we'll come back and run right through it.
2 questions.